it's sort of transformed a bit. I must say that I was, and part of me remains, incredibly hopeful and happy about the Occupy movement in what it does. It pulls together so many, all the different strands about what is wrong with the society we're living in under the Western capitalist consumerist system. Part of my disappointment was the way we, in some ways, replicated the systems we were opposing. Breaking up into groups, sowing distrust of each other, which was only natural of the people who were, you know, a large part of the underclass in Melbourne. The divide and rule mentality, the divide and rule of the state worked very effectively with Occupy Melbourne. You had the different established left groups moving out. You had people, new activists, distrustful of the left groups. You had a whole lot of disenfranchised people joining who were battling with other people in what is this really about. So it seemed to be in a state, I guess quite naturally, in turmoil for a little bit, of trying to find its feet, work out exactly what it was about, and it seems to have now settled down a little bit, and I guess I'm again quietly optimistic that there's a space for the movement to come together in what the Occupy movements originally were, and how they, I guess, they're in their nascent form, a movement of movements rather than another group on its own. So I guess I'm here at the first General Assembly for a long time I've been to, and first one back in City Square, to see where people's heads are at and what people are planning for the future, and to assist, if possible, in, you know, having a renascent Occupy movement happening in Melbourne. What have you got? In the famous words of Jerry Rubin. But it's hard to articulate. The different Occupy movements in different countries are claiming to fight against different things. However, if we look at it, I guess with a big overview, it's all talking about the same thing, and that is people being treated like shit, people being treated by commodities, whether it's due to a war, whether it's due to financial oppression, whether it's due to, you know, in Australia with some of our Indigenous communities for the profits of mining companies, whether it's for electoral points for our politicians. People are being treated like shit. And what I see as the unifying theme of Occupy Melbourne is saying, we are people. We are the people who supposedly run our societies. Nobody has the right to treat us badly, to benefit from our labours, to benefit from our existence while putting us down. We are not commodities. We are not dross. We are not a problem. We are human beings. We have rights and we have pride, and we are going to stand together and fight for them. That is, to me, the unifying theme. I guess it's apt that we're standing here in the city square. They've put up some Christmas things, and the Gospels of Matthew and Luke behind us. I mean, I'm not a Christian, but, you know, that they evicted us and replaced us with celebration of the birth of someone who fought oppression and who spoke about people being having rights and having dignity and being at peace. And I think I'm really glad we've come back to City Square before they've taken all this Christmas and Christian propaganda down. I mean, you know, Christ himself said, you know, we fight not against powers and principalities but the Prince of Darkness. And that's what we're fighting here now. While I don't believe in princes of darkness, is a spirit of oppression that has taken control, a spirit of rampant capitalism that is out of control, that is destroying everything in its path for the benefits of the 1%. Australia, to be honest, hasn't suffered it anywhere near as bad as the rest of the world. We have to say that. And that is partly because we're riding on the back of a mining and minerals boom. However, the wealth of this country is not being shared equitably. The disparity between the wealthiest and the least wealthy in this country is becoming greater every year. In particular, the Indigenous people, the first people of this country. We're having their rights trampled over by a Labor government, which makes it even harder than if it were the Tories, in places like James Price Point, up in Mackay with the gas plant, down in Tasmania, outside of Hobart with the bypass bridge. All over the country, people are having the few rights they've gained over the last few years in Indigenous communities taken away from them. In the Northern Territory, we now have legalised apartheid, more than legalised, institutionalised apartheid, where certain things are legal for some parts of the population but illegal for other parts of the population. Indigenous people have the worst of it in Australia. Having said that, we're now, because white Australia has escaped the brunt of the global financial crisis and all the problems, while at the same time being at the forefront through our participations in US adventurism and wars all around the world, creating major problems that people are fleeing from, we have an obligation to treat people seeking asylum in this country, which is so good by world standards, well and with dignity. The way our current government is treating asylum seekers is atrocious, it's inhumane, and it must be stopped. On a level for the rest of us, we're facing every day increases in police powers, increased surveillance, reduction in services, in health services, in public transport services, privatisation of essential services, the land, the society that we as a people have built, for better or worse, over the last 100 years is being eroded. Our rights are being eroded, our services are being taken away. So there's no one issue for the majority of Australians. It's hard to say it's this or it's that. It's the way everything is just being moved under our feet. It's like the sands are shifting and you don't know, there's, as Eliot said, there's no place where a free man can stand or sit. The reason Australians are, I guess, haven't got behind some of these issues is that the majority of Australians are still doing okay by global standards. They're working longer hours, sure. The purchasing power of their wages are being eroded, services are being taken away, but still they finish a reasonable day's work, they go home and they watch their giant TV screens with their stereos and they eat a good dinner and sleep on a queen-size bed under a feather doona. I mean, life isn't bad for middle Australia. They have too much to lose. People are afraid of losing their jobs, they're afraid of losing their standing in society. However, it's becoming clearer that this ability to live well, our standings in society are not real. They're only almost an illusion. And once that illusion is broken, there's no telling what could happen. Once the people stand up, or I guess more precisely, sit down and say, no, we are not going to do this anymore. We don't give a shit about having a new TV or about getting a new car or whatever, and we're not going to work like slaves and be treated like shit by a government that has neither the intellect nor the morality to rule over us properly. Anything could happen. And that, I guess, myself and every other activist on the planet is the dream that is shared. It was a training exercise, quite frankly. I believe what happened, there's a Occupy Melbourne aside, there is a movement in police forces all around the country and all around the world that is reflecting a reorganisation of the military forces around the world called the RMA, the Revolution in Military Affairs, moving from conventional policing to what's being called asymmetrical policing or asymmetrical warfare. The police forces more and more are focusing less on criminals, like in the standard television cop drama sense, and more on movements and organisations. Real crime itself is moving into cyberspace, and the police are more concerned now with control of the population. What they did here, when you look at the aerial pictures, when you look at the footage, is they tried every last one of the techniques, the wedges, the over and under techniques, the different commands they were giving, the way the new critical incident response team worked with the force response unit and the security intelligence group. It was an absolute trial and a test, a war game, if you will, aimed at control of the civilian population. This wasn't about Occupy Melbourne. They know that Occupy Melbourne was not going to bring down the Australian financial system. They knew that every bit as much as we did. What they were doing was trialling and testing. They've done their tests. It was obvious to myself, and I'm sure it was obvious to them, where their faults were, where they were lacking, and unfortunately I think the next big protest or the next big movement, we're going to see further testing of these new policing methods. That's what I believe it was. I think we as Occupy Melbourne were nothing more than an advantageous thing to happen for the police testing and training at that time. I was doing some of the police liaison during that event. It was obvious to me that the commands were different, the way the police were treating the protesters were different, the different groups of police and units within the police force were acting differently to what they normally do at protests. It was a training exercise, and I think we've more of this to, dare I say it, look forward to. It's absolute control for control's sake. Control for control's sake. You see, only 20 years ago, organising a protest, we could have 300 people here, and all they needed to do was put a thick blue line around us, and nobody in the rest of the world knew what was happening. But now we're here with cameras, mobile phones, Twitter's accounts, to the point where, Twitter, for example, getting the information out to the point where the new Occupy Wall Street were at one point chanting whose tweets, our tweets. And the way social media has become not only so important to our organising, but stopped the way they can control us. Because while we were in here, locked in this cage, we were on the phone to people within transport unions who were talking to tram drivers. We were on the phone to medical units, to lawyers. 12 years ago, we weren't able to do this. Only 12 years ago. So the way we have used technology to stop the apparatus of control is being more than reflected by the way the police are changing their tactics to stop us. They're also using technologies of control, of course, but we're acting differently, they're acting differently. We are no longer limited by voice and sight range. Okay, so they have to move in different ways to control us, and that's what it's about. Hope. I don't believe the Occupy movement is going to achieve its stated objectives of changing the way the global industrial, capitalist, military police systems treat your average human being. I don't believe we're going to achieve any major change in the global financial system. But what I do believe is that we have the hope. We keep the hope alive. We can teach younger people a different way of living. We can show them that alternatives are not only possible, but they're real. Some of the changes I've seen in people here, some of the ways I've changed myself, the interaction between people. It's not about starting, changing the main society. It's about becoming our own society. Since I guess large-scale anti-globalisation protest movement started, I guess with Seattle, which would have been what, 2000, 1999, whenever. It's only been 20 years. 20 years is nothing in the course of changing consciousness. And what I'm seeing and what I'm most hopeful about is seeing so many good people like yourself, like them up there, talking to each other, questioning each other, coming up with new ways of living, new paradigms of ordering their own lives that could eventually be the germ that spreads and infects, almost like a retrovirus. the rest of society. That's all I'm hoping for here. Yeah, well, if you're critical of the Occupy movement, I can say I can understand that. The society you've lived in has taught you that this is not the way to live. However, there are plenty of things you can be critical about. I can't find a single aspect of society, of my own life, that I can't be slightly critical about. It is our nature as human beings, to be critical. That is what we do. That is how we evolve. If we weren't critical, then we never would have come down from the trees if some bugger didn't say, hey, maybe you'd be better living down there, you know? And be critical, but don't just sit on your sofa and watch your television and be critical. Come and experience what it is. Be critical from a point of knowledge, not from a point of ignorance. And to the people who haven't come, I say come down, have a look. Just because you come down to Occupy Melbourne doesn't mean you have to be tagged as a ratbag, troublemaker, whatever. Be down here. We are at the moment a very small minority. We are primarily ratbag troublemakers. And the reason we are ratbag troublemakers, by and large, is that you are not here. Come here, help us broaden Occupy Melbourne. You know, give us some of your ideas, because I know you sitting at home watching this aren't completely happy with the way the world is going. You're not happy with your schooling or the way your kids have gone to school. You're not happy with the way the boss and the government are treating you. You're not happy with the way the cop talked to you that time. Do something about it, my friends. Come and join us and let's work together to make a world that is possible.